I've been taking care of my grandma lately. She's been doing pretty bad, and she needs someone to help her almost 24/7. She's got kind of a bone disease or something. It's basically turning her bones into Swiss cheese. And I've had to carry her to the bathroom and room to room for the past couple of weeks. This might seem kind of tiresome to some people, but I'm glad to do it. My grandma and I have always been close. She basically raised me since my mother was never at home. If I can give back to her now, I consider it fair. She's been alone since I was in high school, and those 10 years have been the happiest I've ever seen her. She and Grandpa had been married for decades, 50 years before Grandpa just left, but they never seemed to get along. When I was young, Grandma would always come over and stay the night instead of having me come over there. Grandpa never came to our house. He mostly stayed close to home or went to work, but the few times I interacted with him, he seemed kind of off. Even as a kid, I didn't think he looked right. That might sound a little mean, but over time, he got paler and less coherent. He would mumble to himself with odd whispery things while he was watching TV. Grandma usually kept him in the bedroom with the TV on and the lights off. He disappeared suddenly when I was in the 9th grade, and it had been almost as much of a relief to me as for Grandma. So last week, when I slid her into bed and told her I was going grocery shopping the next day, so, she better get some sleep, she shook her head and looked away. "I doubt I will. I think this might be my last night in this bed." "Why, you eyeing my bed? I'll swap you, but yours is a lot more comfortable than the one I'm in." "No, son," she cut me off, her voice thready and weak. "I think tonight might be the night I pass on." My eyes got a little big. "Do I need to call Miss Sam? If you think you're going to pass, then I should get the nurse out here, too." "I don't want them out here. You've been good to me, boy. I just want you here with me at the end. Besides, I need to tell you something. I need to confess my sins before I take them to heaven with me." "I mean, I can call Pastor Ferris over if you need to talk to someone about matters spiritual." "No, not Bobby Harris either. I want to confess to you. It's family business, and once I confess it to you, it'll be your burden to carry after I'm gone." I hesitated, thinking that I might not want this secret as I looked at Grandma's face. I had seen that face smile more than anything else, but the look she had now reminded me of something else I'd seen when I was young. It was something I hadn't noticed until I looked back through the lens of time, but Grandma had always seemed a little nervous whenever she stayed at our house. I caught her more than once checking the doors and windows, looking through the living room curtains as if expecting to see someone there. It always made me think that she was scared of someone. It was a look that always made me think a stranger was trying to get in so they could take me away. The truth, it seemed, was darker than that, though. I took a seat on the bed, willing to listen as little as I wanted to. "I'm here, Grandma. If you need to tell me something, then I'll listen." She nodded, looking out the window in her bedroom like someone might be there. "Your granddad didn't disappear," she said, wetting her lips with her wrinkled tongue. "I killed him." That was a shock, and my face must have said as much. She smiled, without much mirth. "Didn't think your old grandma was capable of something like that, huh?" "No, it's just surprising. You guys lived together for decades. I'm not sure why you would choose 10 years ago to..." It wasn't the first time," she said, her voice as thin as a spider web. "I killed your grandpa for the first time in 1973. 10 years ago was just the last time I had to kill him." I was confused, and I said as much, but Grandma only nodded. "Your grandpa, your real grandpa, died in 1972, but he didn't stay dead." She laid it all out, something that took us nearly into the next day. but she never stopped looking out the window as she spoke. I realized now she was looking for Grandpa. When the call came, I was pregnant with your mother. Your grandpa had avoided the draft by attending college and had managed to avoid it again with a waiver from the government. He was an engineer working on bridges and sewer systems in D.C., and I was looking forward to having him home for a few weeks. He had promised to come home before the baby was born, and he was excited to meet his daughter. We had wanted children for years, and when we talked, you could hear the tears on the verge of coming out whenever he talked about our future. The phone call that day, however, seemed to be the end of that dream. They said he'd been killed in a car accident, and that it had been very quick. He had been driving to a job site when someone had run a red light and slammed into the driver's side door. They said he died instantly, hadn't suffered a bit, and I suppose that should have been a mercy. They wanted to bury him in the Capitol, but I was adamant that he be buried here. I wanted his daughter to see him, to know her father, but I couldn't have known how much she would know of him. A week later, before his body was even home, I heard someone in the kitchen late one night. Grandma's voice got low, the husk making my skin crawl as she stared through the little window into the past. I must have looked aside as I came out with the baseball bat, but he never saw me coming. It was a man in military fatigues, eating a sandwich and sitting at my table like he owned the place. He hadn't bothered to turn on any of the lights, and the closer I got, the more I saw. He'd left a duffel bag on the floor beside him, and there was a glass of milk sweating on the table beside his plate. His fingers slipped into the white bread, and the lettuce and tomato looked wet against the roast beef poking out. I didn't challenge him. I didn't think he even knew I was there. When I hit him in the side of the head, he went down like a sack of potatoes. I killed him in that one hit. Hit him just right, I guess, but when I went to see who it was, I felt like I might have a heart attack. It was your granddad. He was laid out on the floor, bleeding from the ears, his blood staining his fatigues. I looked up the pins he had been wearing years after the fact and realized he'd been a corporal in the army. His paperwork said he was back on leave for the birth of his child. He was on 2 weeks of leave before he went back to Vietnam. I was confused. My husband had never been in the army, and as I sat there trying to figure out what to do, I decided to just bury him in the backyard. My husband was dead, and calling up the police to let them know that this man had broken in so we could eat a sandwich would only muddy the waters. So I buried him in the backyard. No easy feat for a woman 7 months pregnant. 3 days later, I was sitting in the living room folding laundry, just trying to get back to normal, when I heard a key in the front door. I heard someone coming in, set the bag down on the end table, and then I heard the last voice I ever expected to hear again. "Sorry I'm late, dear. There was something in the office I had to set up for tomorrow before coming home." It was your grandpa, dressed in a crisp white button-up and pressed suit pants. His tie was blue and white, something I'd never seen before, and it looked expensive. I'd never seen any of his clothes, and I was the one that did all the laundry. He spread his arms wide, waiting for a hug, but I couldn't move. I'd killed him. I'd killed him 3 nights ago. I watched him die, and as I backed away from him, I saw his face twist in confusion. It was painful, a look that hurt my heart. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "It's me. It's Wendell, your loving man." I was against the door frame, hyperventilating, clutching my stomach as your mother kicked inside me. She could sense my fear, feel my uncertainty, and she was responding in kind. He took a step towards me, and I curled into a ball as I tried to protect myself from whatever he meant to do. I expected him to try to attack me, to turn into a vengeful spirit and come after me, but instead he just wrapped his arms around me and hugged me close. "What's wrong, darling? Are you okay? Talk to me." It sounded just like him, and when I wrapped my arms around him, I realized it felt just like him, too. The smell of his aftershave, the rasp of his 5 o'clock shadow on my cheek, the way his hair smelled like seltzer blue. It was all things that let me know it was him. When he hugged me to him, I gasped as I felt the lump on his inner arm where a birth defect had left a bone poking slightly out. It was him. It was your granddad, and I just leaned into him and sobbed as he helped me to my feet and took me to the bedroom. I checked the back of his head later that night when he slept, but there wasn't a mark or anything to lead me to believe that he had been the one I'd clobbered a few nights ago. I lived with that version of your grandpa for 6 months. He worked as a manager at a paper company, his degree in business instead of engineering, and he made a comfortable living for us. If I needed a reminder of the old times, however, I only had to look at the graduation photo hanging in the hallway. It was me and your grandpa in his cap and gown, and me in my best dress, smiling as his mom snapped a photo. I caught him looking at the picture sometimes, trying to rationalize it, before finally moving away to do whatever he'd been heading out to do. He was there for the birth of your mother, and I settled into a life of maternal bliss after that. Your grandfather was much the same as he'd always been, trading talk of bridges for talk of stocks and paper sales, but he was still the same man he'd always been. He loved your mother and me dearly. We never wanted for anything, but after a while, I suspected that something was off about him. It started with the sleep talking. He would mumble ceaselessly from the time his eyes closed till the time they opened again. Your grandfather had always been a prolific snorer, ever since he was little, as his mother liked to say, but now he never seemed to breathe at all when he slept. He would mumble on and on about sewers and the war and stocks and paper and raising dogs and breeding horses and a million other things. Between your mother's nightly feedings and your grandfather's ceaseless muttering, I had become ragged. I couldn't sleep with all that yammering, and no matter where I slept, it always seemed to find me. I tolerated it until one night when I heard something familiar. I came awake to the sound of someone chewing and mumbling. "Where are they? Chew, chew, chew. I can't believe I had to make my own food. It's not enough that I, chew, 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 went and fought them for her, but now I have to make my own sandwich." I had been sleeping on the couch, trying to get some sleep away from the muttering, and as I crept up the hall, listening to him mumble, and even the squeak of the door didn't rouse him from his nightmare. She couldn't even bother to wait for me, chew, 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 just because my bus was a little late. I'm a war hero, a soldier, and she can't even chew, chew. But he paused then, before gasping harshly. "Ah, my head! What the hell is that? It's Maggie! Oh God, she's killed me! She's killed me! She's bashed my head in with a bat! I'm dead on the floor, dead right by my kitchen table. My blood's going everywhere. She's killed me. The pillow was over his face before I could stop myself. I was just so ragged, so mentally fried that I knew he would tattle on me. He'd wake up and tell the police, and they'd find the body, and he'd be here alone with your mother, and who knew what would happen then? He wasn't her father, couldn't be her father, and he might hurt her or kill her, or... She looked back at me, and I could see her eyes swimming with tears. He only struggled a little, and then I had another body to bury." She was quiet for a moment, her eyes returning to the window, before continuing again. "The next one was a car salesman, but he was less like your grandfather than the one before. I read something about how if you photocopy a photocopy, the quality degrades until it's almost unrecognizable. That's how this was. The next one sounded less like your grandfather than that, was paler than him, and seemed to get lost sometimes. I lived with this one for 2 years until he suddenly wandered into traffic outside our house. I told the police that this one was a cousin of my late husband, and that was why he looked so similar. The one after that bred horses, and when one of them threw him, I buried him at the edge of the range where he worked and went home expecting to find another one. I was becoming pretty good at losing husbands by then, and when the next one showed up, I hit him with a frying pan and left him in the backyard with the others. By the time your mother came home from school, there was a new one in the living room, reading the paper. Over the years, I'm ashamed to say I've experimented on how durable they are. I pushed one off the roof after asking him to fix something for me. He broke his neck, and I added him to the growing mass grave in my backyard. I poisoned one over the course of a year until he finally dropped dead one morning over his oatmeal. I pushed one off a mountain during a hike, only to return to the hotel and find a new one there waiting for us. The copies became paler and less coherent. The voices became softer and less substantial. It got to the point that he couldn't hold a job. His mind was like a dementia patient, and I would look up sometimes and find him watching me through the window of wherever I was. Your mother had moved out of the house by then. A retirement check from somewhere showed up in the mailbox from a company that manufactured pipes. The money was good. The money kept us afloat, but I was tired of living with this pale ghost. Then, about 8 years ago, he walked out of the house one morning and never came back. In many ways, it was a blessing. I had become responsible for him. I had to take care of him and lead him around like a child. Suddenly, I was responsible for just me again. I kept cashing those checks until they stopped coming about a year ago, and I kept waiting for the day when he'd come back. I almost dreaded it because it would mean that he had died, and a new pale copy would take his place again. Grandma turned away from the window, locking eyes with me as the night slid by outside. "Now it's your secret. It's your secret and your burden. The bodies in the back are still there. I checked periodically, and though they decompose, the bones remain. I don't know if this version of your grandfather will ever come back, but you will have to watch for him now. I've left everything here for you, the house, the accounts, everything. It's yours now, and I pray it brings you joy." She lay back then, and I could almost watch the life slipping out of her. By midnight, she was dead, and when I turned to get the phone, I saw what she had been waiting for. Gramps was paler than I remembered him, but he looked exactly the same otherwise. He waved at me as he stood there before backing away and leaving the way he had come. I went to the backyard and looked, but there was no one there, and no clue that anyone had been there in the first place. We buried Grandma in a plot next to Grandpa's original body. She lay peacefully there beside her husband. The caretaker tells me that someone comes to see her, though, leaving a single wildflower behind before moving on. I don't think he'll come back, but who's to say what the future might bring? In the meantime, I called the police to let them know about all the bodies in the backyard. The sheriff came and exhumed them, asking all kinds of questions that he didn't seem to believe the answers to. He had them tested, and to his surprise, all of them came back a match for my grandfather. Dental records, DNA, hair samples, it all comes back a match, and they were all left scratching their heads. They couldn't really charge my grandmother with anything. You can't put a dead person in prison after all, and they were left with a mystery for the ages. Either way, it's nice to have the bodies gone, and it was good that Grandma got to die at peace. As for Grandpa, I guess I'll just have to wait for the day when a new one shows up. Hopefully, I won't have a body of my own to bury when he does. Grandma and I have been roommates for about a year now. That probably sounds pretty weird for a 23-year-old girl to say, but I have to say it's been a pretty great arrangement. My girlfriend and I have lived in the apartment for about 3 years now, both of us deciding that campus housing wasn't for us. Grandma may be sort of a new arrival, but I gotta say she's probably about the best roommate I've ever had. She cooks, she cleans, doing so despite Regina and I telling her that we don't expect her to, and our laundry always seems to find its way into the closet once the hamper is full. She was one of those hippie types who missed the 60s and is incredibly chill. I don't know many other grandmothers who like to sit on the back porch at night with us and have a beer and smoke a bowl. She doesn't judge me for what most people over 50 would consider an unnatural relationship either, which means the world to Regina and I. She told my girlfriend many times that she considers her a second granddaughter, and the people in the community tell me how cool it is to have someone like my grandma in our lives. Most nights, while we sit on the porch, having a beer or two and passing around some stuff that's not strictly legal here, Grandma would tell us how this reminds her of how she and her friends acted when they were young. My friends and I would sit on the veranda and drink wine sometimes. The nights in Greece are warm, and we used to just sit in our shifts and tease the boys when they came by. It was a marvelous time to grow up. The war was a distant memory, at least for those of us who were young, and life was full of possibilities. Grandma grew up in Greece, missing the end of the war by 3 years, and she often talked lovingly about her time there. She was never very clear about where she grew up, but it must have been near the water because many of her stories involved she and her friends swimming or going to the beach with boys they fancied. She'd met Grandpa at 17, him studying abroad and her waiting tables in a cafe. She said it had been love at first sight, and he'd asked her to marry him once his time in Greece was over. He brought me back to California with him, and to me, it was the grandest place in all the world. She often told us stories from when she was young, and Regina and I usually found ourselves laughing at the antics of her younger self. She and her friends had sounded less like a group of young girls and more like a group of street toughs. Grandma told us how they had done everything from teasing boys into fighting to stealing a scooter and fleeing from the police. If it hadn't been for Great Aunt Sophie and Uncle Martin, Grandma might have been a full-fledged criminal instead of a sometimes rapscallion. They had all been happy stories, at least until tonight. Regina had come home from work, and I could tell that something was off right away. Regina's in nursing school and often has to work in the ER as part of her studies. They pay them for their time, of course, but it's expected that students will pursue jobs in the medical field so they can gain experience. Regina is usually full of stories about how she helped clear the airway of a baby, or how she got a patient to tell her that the prescription drug they had taken was more recreational than they'd let on. Grandma and I had already started our little revel without her, and she took the beer I handed her with a shaky hand. I watched her sip it for a few seconds, hands jittering, before finally asking her what had happened. They brought in a lady today. She'd been stabbed over a dozen times, and they said she had no pulse. They wheeled her in on a gurney and asked if I'd notify the morgue that they had a Jane Doe to go back. I nodded. Not your first dead body, babe. Regina shook her head. I turned to get the phone, the paramedics walking away for a moment as a call came in over the radio, and when I turned back, the woman had sat up. It was a little scary, but I thought it was just gas in the corpse or something. I turned back to the phone, and then the gurney started creaking as she climbed off. She went walking up the hall like a ghost in her sheet, and when I started screaming, the paramedics came back in a hurry. It seemed funny to me, a lady in a sheet shuffling up the hallway towards freedom, but I guess it was a little different when you were living it. Turns out she had a very weak pulse, and when she'd come in, she'd attempted to run. Her heart stopped before she got to the door, and she died right there in the ambulance bay. How terrible, I said, my image less funny now. She must have been searching for her killer, just like poor old Victor, Grandma said, patting Regina on the arm. Who, I asked, not sure who this Victor was that Grandma was talking about. Victor Mustroff, she elaborated. He was a handsome young man in the village I grew up in. He was quite a bit older than me, around 22 when I was 13, but he was so handsome. It was a shame what happened to him, but it was even worse what happened afterwards. I leaned forward on the cheap plastic chair I was sitting on and asked her to tell us. She nodded. It's a little scary, though. At least, it gave me a shiver when I was young. As she spoke, her eyes seemed to cloud a little, her mind traveling back over the years and the miles. It all started after Victor's murder. They didn't realize it was a murder right away, of course. Poor old Victor was a carpenter, he and his brother Isaac. The two worked for his father, Marcus, but it was pretty clear who Marcus favored. Victor was set to take over his father's operation when his father grew too old to work, and Victor had let this and his charm go to his head. He was vain, we all knew it, but he was charming too, and his vanity was really no big deal. He dated many girls in the village, and my friends and I were even taken with him. Then, one day, he went missing. We all searched for him, the whole town coming together to look for a favored son. Isaac came with us, saying that his brother had left the job site after saying he had to go do something. We searched the woods and the hills and everywhere around the village, but we couldn't find his car or Victor. He was simply gone. A week went by with no sign of him, but most of us just assumed he had taken after some woman from out of town. Victor was prone to that sort of behavior, but this was the longest he had ever been gone. Isaac went right on working, like his older brother wasn't just gone. Marcus, however, was inconsolable. We saw him many evenings sitting on the porch, sot drunk and weeping openly. Isaac would often be trying to console him, but Marcus wanted nothing from that one. My friends and I changed sides of the street when we walked past Marcus's house, not wanting to get drawn into their arguments. Then, one night, someone said they saw something strange. I heard it around the market first. It was an older woman, someone's grandmother, who said they had been walking home when they encountered someone they thought was Victor. He was staggering on a badly twisted leg, kicking up dust from the cobbles with every shaky step. His clothes, however, looked like the kind of garments a dandy might wear. His vest was filthy. His pants left a trail of water when he walked. I called his name, thinking he might have been in an accident, and when he turned around, I thought for certain I would faint. The hair was wet and lank, the curtains seeming to spin in slow motion, and then I could see the weeping crater that was his face. He had no eyes, no nose, no mouth, and the holes where they had been did little but gurgle and wheeze. I screamed, turning away in my fright to clutch the edge of the fountain, and when I looked back, it was gone. I scoffed at her story as other old ladies clutched their rosaries and told her she was lucky to be alive. Old women often made things up like this, I thought in my youthful wisdom, and went back to shopping. It was likely just some beggar or a scarred-up vagrant. I told my friends about it that night as we sat smoking on my mother's veranda, and we all laughed at how silly she had been. When Julia saw him that night on her way home, it changed our outlook a bit. Julia was supposed to spend the night, but she ran home after dark to get something. She was gone for a little while, longer than I had thought she would be, and when she came back, she was out of breath and sweating, close to hyperventilating. It took us quite a while to calm her down, but finally she told us that she had seen the man from the old woman's story. It was just like she said, she gasped, her face fearful as she recalled it. I was going home to get my records, and when I came to the plaza near the fountain, I heard a weird dragging sound. He came out of an alley, and I turned to see his smushed face looking straight at me.
I ran as fast as I could, but it seemed that no matter where I went, he was limping close by. Finally, I hid in the market until he shambled away, but I was terrified that he would find me. We consoled her, trying to keep her quiet so that she didn't disturb my parents with such talk, and eventually she went to sleep as her fear began to ebb. The strange, shambling man was all anyone could talk about in the coming days. People saw him walking through the streets, shambling along as though looking for someone. He would always be gone whenever a group came to see him, but the longer it lasted, the more people started traveling in groups. There was a lot of speculation about who it was and what they were after, and some people thought it might be Victor. Chief among them was Miss Treda, a woman believed to be a Strega. She claimed that Victor was seeking his killer and wanted to find his body so that they could use cruentation to find him. She had conducted things like this before, offering to help the police if they would let her display the body, but she had been turned down many times. Cruentation was something old that she believed in, and it seemed to associate guilt with the blood coming from a dead body when the murderer touched it. No one really believed in it anymore. It was an ancient practice. And besides, how would you collect everyone up to touch the body? Our town was home to hundreds, and collecting them all would be quite an effort. Most people rolled their eyes at Miss Treda, but I think a lot of them secretly believed that the shambling specter was Victor. When it broke into Marcus's house and scared him half to death, many more people thought it might also be Victor. A few people whispered in the market the next day that the spirit had come after Marcus, and there were some rumblings about checking if he was the murderer. Miss Treda had started offering money to anyone who could find Victor's body. Some young men had started roving the streets at night to see if they could follow the specter back to his place of rest, but it seemed to avoid them as easily as it avoided the constables that hunted for it. This went on for several weeks, and it was very exciting times. People sat and made up wild rumors about the stranger and what it wanted, and my friends and I were no exception. Then one night it all came to an end. I remember being woken up by someone screaming. Our house wasn't too far from Isaac's house, and when I went to my window I could see the corpse as it carried him through the streets. It had him by the front of his shirt, Isaac beating at him as it carried him towards the plaza where he had first been seen. Others were looking out their windows, watching the grim procession as it made its way through the streets. Despite the horror, many of us put on our robes and shoes and ran to see where the shade was taking poor Isaac. As he came into the plaza, it was hard for the crowd to ignore the blood that was oozing from him, his pores excreting this thick and tarish juice. Miss Treda, standing amongst the crowd by then, didn't have to tell them what that meant. Isaac had already begun confessing his sin again and again for all to hear. Upon hearing him confess, it was as though the shade folded in on itself. He collapsed, dropping Isaac and laying dead on the cobbles of the plaza. The constables arrested him immediately, and I watched him beg for forgiveness as they hung him 3 months later. His lawyer drug out the proceedings, claiming that evidence provided by a corpse was not the modern justice that he was about, but the number of people who had heard him confess in the plaza was inarguable. Isaac himself pled guilty, despite his lawyer pleading for him to be silent, and he refused to leave jail until he was led to the gallows. I heard he told people that Victor's shade visited his window every night, and he was afraid to leave the jail, fearing it might come after him. 100 people saw Victor's corpse bleed that night, 100 or more at least, and they all lived in fear of the shade for nearly a month. That was thankfully the only time I saw a corpse walk. Regina and I looked at each other, both of us trying to see if the other really believed her. As I lay here now, Regina snoring thinly beside me, I can say that, whether I believe or not, it's a story that'll follow me for quite some time.
My grandmother has been catatonic for the last 5 years. On the night that Grandpa died, her neighbors called the police to come check on her. They said she was screaming loud enough to be heard 3 houses down, and when the paramedics arrived, she had ruptured something in her throat. Grandpa was dead in the bed they shared, a heart attack, and they zipped Grandpa into that black bag that would take him to the morgue. They carried Grandma out on a stretcher, however. After that, she wouldn't speak, wouldn't move. She just laid in bed and stared at the ceiling of her room in Shady Lane Nursing Home. My grandma, always a strong lady, is fed mechanically. She wears a diaper that an orderly has to change. The physical exercise she gets comes in the form of a physical therapist moving her legs for her as she stays in bed. If she leaves the room, it's because Denise or Reggie, the only two orderlies that seem to give a crap about the residents, lift her into her wheelchair and take her outside, or maybe to use the resource center, which is really just a fancy word for the TV room. I begin my story in this way, so you'll know how weird today's events were. I'm a 35-year-old father of two. I've been married since I was 27 to the love of my life. I thought that after 8 years of marriage and raising kids, nothing could get to me like it did today. I'm sitting at my computer, a bottle of scotch at my elbow, sinking into a fear of returning to my marriage bed. It all started when I went to visit my grandma today. My family has a system. My mom and dad go visit Grandma on Monday. I visit on Wednesday. My little sister Lisa goes on Friday. And we all go to visit on Sunday after church. My wife doesn't go every time, but she comes with me sometimes. She's known Grandma since we were 17, and she remembers her before her current condition. She wasn't particularly close with my grandparents, but I think she likes to be there for me. My grandma and I have always been close. I love my grandma, and I don't want to waste the time I might have left with her. Whether she knows I'm there or not, it's the thought that counts, and I owe her that much. I went on my lunch break today to see her. Reggie was there when I came in. He gave me a big smile as he finished fussing with her pillows. "It always warms my heart to see you and your sister coming to visit the old girl," he said. He let me know her vitals, told me about the doctor's visit she'd had last week, and then he said he'd leave us to our visit. Just me and Grandma. I took out my lunch and made some one-sided small talk as I ate. I had read somewhere that coma patients are aware that someone is talking to them, and in some cases, it sometimes helps them come out of it. Grandma wasn't really in a coma. No one really knew what was going on with her, but I like to think that maybe one day she'd come out of it and thank me for all the lovely visits. She'd say that it was my voice that had kept her going all those years. I'm pretty sure my sister just played on her phone the whole time she was there, and I'd feel like I'd helped Grandma in some way, while she was going through some troubled times. Be careful what you wish for, I guess. I was just telling Grandma about a client I had helped at work when she suddenly inhaled sharply and exhaled in a rattling, skeletal way. I paused, my hand still holding hers as it always did, and was about to get Reggie. Suddenly, the hand tightened spasmodically, and she made another of those rattling breaths, her eyes rolling wildly. She was like a frightened horse looking for an escape, and though it was the middle of the day, I felt a cold chill run through me as she shuddered and gasped in pure terror. "His hands, the hands of the dead," she breathed out. I pushed back suddenly, letting go of her clenching hand. "Grandma, are you? Oh, listen to me. I don't have much time, Bug." She was awake. Her face was pale and thin, her hands little more than fleshy claws, but she was awake. She was looking at me in that way that people look at fire exits in infernos, and as I tried to get up, she reached out again and took my hand in her cold, damp embrace. I wanted to get Reggie. Reggie would know what to do, but the naked want on her face held me in place. I knew I wasn't going anywhere. She'd called me Bug. That had always been her nickname for me. And when she said it, I realized how much I had wanted to hear her say it again. "Please, Bug, I need to tell you what he said. You need to know." She was frantic, almost pleading, and my knees sent me down without thinking. This is what she told me. They had been in bed together when it had happened. They were both at that advanced age where laying together was just that. The two were in bed, sleeping, just being with each other, when Granddad had suddenly woken her up. His arms had been around her, her back against his front. I knew from familiarity that this was how they'd slept since they'd been married since they were 17. The position was natural as sleep itself to them. His shuddering had woken her up. His hands were grasping at me. His fingers were together like a pair of mittens, and he was opening and closing like a slow, painful machine. His mouth was against my ear, and his breath was raspy and panting. He sounded like he'd been running, and as he bucked around, I knew he was having another heart attack. Your granddad's health hadn't been good for a while, but as I tried to break free of his arms, he held me tight and leaned his mouth in close. "No, Ellie, don't go, please. I'm scared. I'm scared." He said it, and God help me, he sounded terrified. "Don't be scared, Roy," I told him. "You'll be okay. I'll call Dr. Stevens, and I can't see, Ellie." That's what he said to me. "I can't see. They say you see the light or hear a voice, but I can't see anything, Ellie. It's all just black. All just black. I can't see his face or hear his voice." He gripped me then, hard, and I felt his nails through my nightshirt as he did it. His heart attack was bad, and I was terrified that he wouldn't come through this time. I tried to break free. I tried to get loose, but his arms were so rigid that I couldn't get away. The whole time he's just panting and telling me how there's nothing there, and it's all just blackness, and he knows there's nothing there. He kept right on repeating it, even as his voice went on and on, until finally it just went out, and then he leaned in close until his lips were right at my ear, and he breathed out one final time. That was the first time I screamed. I screamed because I was in the arms of a dead man. He was gone, Bug. He'd breathed his last, and that was that, but now I was caught in his last embrace. Her voice took on a tenuous, hysterical sound, and I remember thinking that somewhere a machine must be going off. Somewhere telemetry must be telling someone how her heart was racing along much too fast. Someone somewhere must be on their way with a crash cart or a doctor or a shot to calm her, because in this room she was close to hysterics. I wanted to get that shot. As many times as I'd prayed to God to hear her speak again, I wanted to see that man come through the door with that shot so she could slip off again. As much as I wanted her back, I knew that this was not okay. At that moment, I just wanted her catatonic again. I wanted this jittery, hysterical creature out of pain. I pulled at his hand, those long hands that would take mine sometimes, and they were hard as stone. They locked in death, and now I could not separate them. His weight was a stone around me, and I was afraid, Bug. I was afraid that I'd never get loose, that they'd find us both dead right there, him of a heart attack, and me of just plain old starvation. Her voice broke, and when she closed her hurting green eyes, I saw the tears spilling out of them. I had to break his fingers. They sounded like dry twigs when they crack in the fire, and after I'd broken 4 of them, I almost had his hands apart. That's when he came back. She whispered this as though he might hear her. Her words made my blood run cold. He'd been dead for 5 minutes, Bug. His chest was close enough that I could feel nothing beating. But all of a sudden, his arms tightened around me, and he screamed in my ear like a wolf in a trap. He pulled me hard against him. I felt my ribs trying to break, and all of a sudden, he was bucking and thrashing like the devil himself had a hold on him. "It burns! It burns, Ellie!" He just kept screaming and screaming into my ear. And when I finally thrust his hands apart, I rolled out of bed and got as far as I could. That's where they found me. They found me in the corner. They found me screaming. I don't know what was burning him, but I saw his last few minutes before he went out again. He writhed, he screamed, and he died in agony. What kind of place could make a man scream like that? I thought to myself, I don't ever want to go to that place. What kind of place could it be? What kind of place? What kind of place? What kind of place? She just kept right on, mumbling that phrase again and again and again, until I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and ran out as fast as I could. I never looked back. I don't know what I'll do next time I have to see her. I didn't go back to work. I called my boss and told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. He let me. He's a good guy. When I called Reggie later that afternoon, he told me that she was right as rain, as usual. When he'd given her her meds that afternoon, she was still lying in bed, staring at the ceiling as always. He never hinted at any change in the telemetry, never said a word about abnormal vitals, just told me how much he knew it meant to her that I came to visit. Now, I'm sitting at my computer and I don't know what to do. I've been sitting here for about an hour, contemplating how I'll get on with the rest of my life, knowing my grandfather's agony and my grandmother's terror at the end of his life. I've been contemplating how I'll climb in bed with my own wife tonight, a problem that seems to be more here and now. You see, the thought of her wrapping her arms around me, placing her chest against my back, it makes me want to shudder right out of my skin. What would I do if she woke up in the throes of a heart attack? What would I do if she whispered those same hopeless words into my ear as she died? What would I do if I found myself trapped in my own dying love's last embrace?
I don't know if anyone's going to read this. I don't even know if anyone will care. But I have to tell somebody. It's too much to process right now, and maybe if I get some of it off my chest, it will make it easier to handle. I'm getting ready to go into the unknown, and I feel like someone needs to know why. Someone needs to know how it came to all this, and how I came to be a potential murderer/avenging angel. Above all else, I need to tell someone about Charlie. I'd known Charlie since we were in grade school together. Charlie thought of us as brothers, since he didn't have any of his own, and loved us like family. Despite that, never think we were the most important people in Charlie's life. No, the most important person in Charlie's life was his grandmother. Charlie's grandmother, he'd always called her Grandmom, was the one who raised Charlie since the day he was born. Charlie's mother died in childbirth, and his father died before he was even born, so without a guardian, that just left Charlie and his grandmom. Grandmom and Charlie. Charlie's grandmom lived out in the country, in an old wooden farmhouse with a big backyard and acres of fields for growing things. She rented the land to sharecroppers and must have done pretty well for herself because Charlie couldn't recall a time she'd ever had to work. Charlie didn't have any other family, none that he'd ever met anyway, and for the first 8 years of his life it was just the two of them alone in that farmhouse. Charlie said he remembered being sick a lot as a kid, and most of his earlier memories were he and his grandmom on the couch while she nursed him back to health from one illness or another. Grandmom would sit at home with him while he convalesced, watching Sesame Street and eating whatever Grandmom could whip up in the kitchen. Most days, Charlie would just spend the whole day on her lap while she rocked him and hummed strange little Russian songs to him. Grandmom wasn't originally from here, you see. She had emigrated during the Second Great War, and she and his grandfather had moved out to the country because it reminded her of her childhood home. Coming from the old country, she had all kinds of folk remedies, good-tasting recipes, and strange little songs that she would sing to Charlie as he drifted off to sleep or lay sick on the couch. One in particular that Charlie recalled fondly had become a ritual of sorts, a ritual that goes on to this day, I assume, that took on the normalcy of time and repetition. She would take him on her lap, pull his face close to hers, and place her hands on his cheeks as she put their foreheads together. Charlie recalled the bumpy, veiny skin there beneath his smooth baby skin as she did this, and the warmth that always seemed to radiate from her. With their foreheads pressed together, she would sing a strange song to him in her thick Russian tone before releasing him and planting a kiss on his forehead. "What does it mean, Grandmom?" Charlie would always ask, and the asking was as much a part of the ritual as the ritual itself. "It means," she would say in her warm, gravelly voice, "always together, even when apart, always a part of me, here in my heart." Charlie had never thought it was odd that he lived in relative isolation with his grandmother, not until he started school. His grandmom had tried to homeschool him for a few years, but her teaching wasn't up to the state standards, so she had grudgingly allowed Charlie to attend public school. Here Charlie came into contact with other children, and first learned how strange his situation was. In class, we would do assignments or draw pictures of our family, and Charlie's was always the smallest when put up on the bulletin board with the rest. Charlie began to wonder why he didn't have any uncles or aunts or cousins, or any family besides Grandmom. When he asked her, though, she always shrugged and gave him the same answer. "Your grandfather and I
had the one child. Your father was not a strong boy. He was sick, often like you are, and we were afraid to have another. By the time he was old enough to over his sickness, your grandfather was dead, and it was only me and your father." That made Charlie feel a little better. His father had been like him in that sense, sickly and alone with his grandmom, so it couldn't be that strange. That didn't stop the other kids from teasing him, though. I remember Charlie when he first arrived at school, and the other kids had him pegged as an oddball from the get-go. Going to school in the early 90s, it was all about how cool you were, how many cool things you had on your clothes. Charlie showed up the first day of school looking like the boy from the hot chocolate box my mom always bought. He wore suspenders and stockings, knee boots, and shirts with weird fringes on them. He stuck out like a sore thumb. This, mixed with his funny way of talking and his stunted knowledge base, made the other kids think he was slow and kind of a dweeb. He came in for quite a bit of ridicule, and I recall it was a hard couple of days before my friends and I got involved. This is where I come into Charlie's story, I guess. I had never taken part in the teasing, and over time I began to feel bad for him. I pushed some of my friends to invite him to play with us, and we were surprised to find not a dumb kid, but an imaginative kid, who joined in our games eagerly. His grandmom, had taught him a little Russian, which we thought was just the coolest, and we gave him some of our old clothes to wear so he didn't stand out quite so much. Together, we played G.I. Joes or superheroes or whatever the game of the day happened to be, and outside of play, we helped Charlie stand up for himself and make the bullies stop. As we got older, Charlie stayed at our place a lot, and we really helped him come out of his shell and adapt to life outside of Grandmom's house. We were friends with Charlie all the way through high school, and after high school, we all thought we might get an apartment together. Zach, Tristan, Charlie, and I, so we could attend college together. Charlie was hesitant. He didn't want to leave his poor old grandmom alone in the middle of the woods. So when he turned up at the house a few days later with a scant few possessions, I was pretty surprised. He had 2 plastic bags of clothes, a zipper bag of toiletries. After some coaxing, he told me he and his grandmom had had a really nasty fight. This surprised me, because I'd never heard of Charlie's grandmom ever raising her voice to him in all the time I'd known him. And he seemed just as shocked about the outburst as we were. She had refused to give him any of his stuff, except what he'd brought with him, and told him not to expect her to send him money or anything else. If he moved out now, he was on his own. You could tell how upset he was, poor guy, and we helped him out as best we could. He ended up sleeping on my couch until his first Pell check came in, and after that, he just kinda made do. I had expected that would be the end of his closeness with his grandmom, but I couldn't have been more wrong. After a few weeks of silence, she went back to calling him every day, and to our astonishment, he made plans to have dinner with her and help her with her shopping. She would send him money sometimes, and he would go over several days a week to eat dinner or lunch, and slowly things began to return to normal. She still wouldn't let him take any of his stuff out of her house, but he got some new stuff, and by the time his first semester was done, he had everything that he needed. Things went on in this way for about 3 years, at least until last Wednesday. Charlie and I had just got back from class when he got a call from his grandmom. His face fell as they talked, and you could tell that Charlie was barely holding back tears. She hadn't been doing well for several years, nearly from the time Charlie moved out, and I personally thought it was a guilt trip to keep her grandson close to home, though I'd never say as much to Charlie. He talked to her for a few minutes and then immediately went to his room and packed an overnight bag. He told me to tell his counselor that he had a family emergency and needed to go home to be with his grandmother. When I asked him what was going on, he told me that she was dying and she wanted him to stay with her until she passed. I commiserated with him and told him to give her my best and to stay in contact so we knew when he'd be back. That was a week ago, and it was the last time anyone has ever seen or heard from Charlie. His car is gone, his things are gone from his room, and Charlie has disappeared without a trace. I drove the hour to his grandmother's house, hoping to find some clues when I got there, only to be greeted by a stranger when the door opened. She was a tall, dark-haired woman with lank hair and a swollen, pregnant belly, and she was no one I had ever seen before. Yeah, hell, Charlie and his grandmom are the only 2 people I'd ever seen at the house before now. She claimed to be a distant relative that had inherited the house from Charlie's grandmother when she died. She didn't seem to speak English very well, and was completely unsure as to who Charlie was or where he had gone to. We quickly lost patience with each other, and she yelled at me to leave before she called the authorities. I seethed all the way home, but I couldn't get any answers out of her. I got my answers last night. It was around 2 a.m. in the morning when something woke me up from a deep sleep. My legs were full of pins and felt like someone was sitting on them. I rolled over, thinking one of my roommates had wandered in drunk, only to find Charlie sitting on my bed. Even in the dim light, I could tell something was wrong. Charlie looked bad. Withered somehow, like a grape that gets left in the crisper drawer for too long. Or a corpse after it's dried out in a grave. He spoke to me, his voice a rattling rasp in my ears, and told me that something had happened. He'd gone to be with his grandmom. He found her on her deathbed, and she'd reached for him with her withered arms when he'd come in. He'd slumped, weeping by her bedside, and she'd reached out with her wrinkled hands and touched his face. He looked at her, and she had asked him to put his forehead against hers, so she could say the words one last time. She was my grandmom, and I loved her. How could I deny her anything? He said, his voice racked with pain. So he let her draw his face to hers, and she said the old familiar words as she always had. Always together, even when apart. Always a part of me, here in my heart. But when she kissed him on the forehead, his lips already starting to ask what it meant, he felt something strange. It was like she was taking everything from me. My breath, my blood, my bones, my seed, and all with that single kiss on my forehead. As she had taken all of it from him, he had crumpled up into a dried husk as she changed before his eyes. Her hair darkened, her skin tightened, her eyes sparkled, and he said that her belly had grown large even as her breasts grew heavy with milk. When she stood over him, she was 50 years younger, a girl of 20, and I realized that she was the woman who had opened the door for me. She stood over him, cackling at his desiccated form, and her face was devoid of the love that had always been there. Now you see why I have kept you close all these years. Now you'll see the fruit of my labor, just as your father did before you and your grandfather before him, she said, looking down at Charlie without pity or remorse. Why? He asked huskily, his voice dry as a desert. Why have you done this? Why? This is the state that befalls all your line. Males for centuries and centuries. Males from the first of your name to crawl upon this earth. He told me I was ugly. He spat on my love, and he promised me that I would never have him. I promised him that I would have all of his line, bear them and break them. So I have from that time on. Your son, she said, and gave her belly a little stroke, will be no different. And as she stood cackling over him, Charlie died and passed into the void that waits beyond. He told me all of this as I sat huddled by the head of my bed, but promised me that she was wrong. She would have no more from his line. The cycle would end with his son. He told me some things he understood now, and called his grandmother a vedma, which is the Russian word for witch. He also called her a strigoi, but he hopes he's wrong about that. A mortal man may kill a vedma if he is very lucky, he told me, but a strigoi is another matter entirely. He made me promise if I ever called him friend, to rescue my son and kill his grandmom, once and for all. It will be dark soon, and he says that tonight will be the night of her delivery, which will make her weak. I'm leaving this here just in case I don't come back, in case someone out there might save Charlie's son if I fail. I have the things I need, and midnight will be here before I know it. I hope I'm strong enough to do what must be done. I pray I don't come to my friends in the night with a similar request. I pray that I can break this curse and make Charlie its last victim.
It's less of a memory and more of a hazy sort of dream. I dream it so often that I have to believe it's real, and it never ceases to wake me in a state of terror. I'm standing on my grandparents' cracked carport, their old Ford Aerostar parked on it as it makes twin walkways to the door that leads inside. At first I thought I was sitting or walking on my knees, but then I realized I'm just very small. This must have happened when I was younger, 2 or 3 maybe, and my steps are a little unsteady as I toddle along. I can see the normal collection of carport junk as it slides by my field of vision, an old bike, a leaf blower, some lawn chairs, and I seem to be making my way towards a large rusty grill that's near the back of the carport. I can almost feel the sleek surface of that van as I slide my fingers along it. I was drawing pictures in the road dirt, the mud and dust that cling to a vehicle, and I was making little waves with my finger as I walked along. I had turned to draw a dolphin as he jumped out of the water, his mouth open and smiling, and that was when I saw it. It crawled from under the front of the van, slow and deliberate, and I turned my head as it came into my peripherals. The spider looks absolutely massive to me. It's roughly the size of a human hand, and it's stretched out and looking at me as if it can't believe it's seen me either. He wiggles his pincers at me, and I felt a shiver run through me as I felt his regard. I feel a sense of dread that has no place in a child that young. Even then, I knew that I didn't want this thing to come near me. I had a real case of arachnophobia when I was younger, and I think this might have been what started it. I didn't like rubber spiders, pipe cleaners that form the shape of spiders, or anything that was even vaguely spider-shaped. I would have rather cut my hand off than hold a living spider, and even just seeing a plastic one or a picture of a spider in a book was enough to make my skin crawl. I remember this one taking a step toward me, and I took a step back from it as that feeling of fear spread through me. It was deliciously invasive, a feeling I would later chase through haunted houses and dark movie theaters. But with all the life experience that a 2 or 3-year-old can have, it was something I didn't like. It made me think of the sounds I sometimes heard in the closet, under the bed, outside my bedroom window. Anywhere else, there might be a monster when the lights were out. It took another step, and then another, and then another, and I backed away on unsteady legs. I know now that it probably had no intention of hurting me. It was probably just curious. But in the dream, I am certain, with the logic only a child can hold, that this creature will end my life. The spider would bite me and put some devious poison into me. It would grow to towering heights and swallow me whole. It would wrap me up in a cocoon and drag me off so it could drain my blood, like the spiders did in my animal books, and 1,000 other terrible things. These are things that adults know are impossible, but children know not only can happen, but have happened 1,000 times before. I backpedaled in the dream, moving away as I kept my hands on the smooth surface of the van. But suddenly, disaster struck. I stumbled, falling backward onto my butt and hands, and I cry out as the pavement takes its toll on the flesh of my smooth, unblemished hand. I was momentarily distracted by the pain in my hand, and then I looked up as if suddenly remembering the spider. For a moment, I cannot see it, and that fills me with relief. It's moved off. It's gone after tastier prey, and now I can get away from the carport at a more leisurely pace. Then I twitch my foot to the side, and there it is, clicking its pincers menacingly as it stares at me. I cry out in fear, and then someone cries out behind me, as they call my name. I'm momentarily startled, their voice echoing in the carport, and then I'm scooped up and pulled out of danger by strong, assuring hands. The spider is suddenly miles below me, a toy or a stain on the concrete instead of a threat. And as whoever has picked me up brings a large black house shoe down on the spider, it becomes an actual stain on the concrete. I always wake up as they babble nonsense to me, and no matter how many times I have the dream, it never makes much sense. So the last time I was at my grandmother's house, I asked her about it. She just laughed. God, I'm surprised you can remember that far back. Yeah, it happened right out there on the carport. You were playing outside while I gardened, and I saw you toddle into the carport and didn't think anything of it. You've never hurt yourself out there before, so I figured I'd just let you play. When you yelled, I came on the run to see what had happened. You were sitting there, crying, and right by your foot was the biggest wolf spider I've ever seen. He was no tarantula, but he could have definitely bit you and made it hurt. My protective nature kicked in, and I stomped him before I could even think about it. I usually leave them alone. It's bad luck to kill a spider, but this one had menaced my grandbaby, and I couldn't have that. It was kind of weird to realize that a dream I had had for years and years was something that had actually happened. Makes me wonder if I've had other dreams that might be real as well.